This is my final project, and I am going to go through my slides and explain in detail my answers to the questions. Question number 1 was, over the past semester in Education 4400, how have I engaged in activities that will go on to inform my teaching practice? And the best way to describe this is with Project 1. During Project 1, I did a book review on the book How Children Fail by John Holt. And this book just focused on the 4 main ways children fail within schools, and then also how schools and teachers fail children. And then this book was written in narrative form, so John Holt wrote diary entries from observing and teaching his friend Bill Hull's 5th grade class. And because he was writing it in this way, I was able to find many teaching methods that I chose and want to implement in my future classroom, and a couple I implemented in my internship classroom. The first one was, it was called the Q. And what the Q is, it's an uppercase Q that you put on the board, and this tells students that, hey, I'm talking, there needs to be no talking, so you can hear me explain something, give directions, or just teach content. Then, accompanied by the uppercase Q, there was a lowercase q that they put on the board. This meant that students could talk quietly on task about the directions or the content itself or the task at hand. And this lowercase q allowed the teacher to walk around and monitor what students were saying and offer help if needed. And then lastly, if there was nothing on the board, the students could just talk about anything that they wanted. I tried this in my internship class this semester, and it went amazingly. The students just absolutely loved it. They loved knowing exactly if they were allowed to be talking, if they couldn't talk, what they were supposed to be talking about. And it was cool for me because the students liked having that extra part, so they were just more engaged to see what I was going to write on the board. And the second thing that I implemented in the classroom was just something that I related to personally, and it had to do with the book on the second part was titled Fear and Failure, and why we should combat that and how. And the reason I wanted to put this in here is because children fear failing so much. They fear failing and disappointing their teachers and not making that grade, and that can stop them from trying their hardest because they think they're going to fail. And the one that I really focused on was creating a safe space within the classroom, because when children feel that they have a safe space, they aren't afraid to make mistakes, and they know that they can come to me or the teacher at any time with any questions that they have that they don't understand. And the way that I went about doing this in my classroom was I just said at the beginning of every lesson, I was like, there is no wrong answer. All I want you to do is try your hardest. That's all I expect from you. And if you get it wrong, that's okay, because then I can just come in and help you, or another student can help you. My second question was, what ideas do I have for how I will continue to engage in activities to improve my teaching practice? So I just listed some and I'll explain them. Right now, I go to my internship and I attend PLCs with my clinical teachers, and these PLCs are just designed to talk about what's working within the classroom and what's not. Are there teaching methods that we're using that we wanted to try? And if so, like, how are they doing with our tier 3 students? Like, are they helping them get more on grade level, or are they just something that they're not responding to? It also helps go over test scores to see where students are at and where we need to get them. And this improves my teaching practice because it lets me see from an administration side what students need. And then from there, I can take that and plan my lessons accordingly. Another thing I want to do is continue research about motivation within the classroom. And the reason I want to continue my research is just because motivation is such a powerful tool that we can use within the classroom, and I truthfully don't know that much about it. I know the idea and what types of motivation there are, but I haven't begun to research like different ways to implement it within the classroom. And then another way I plan to do it is to just hold regular meetings with my CTs throughout my internship. I want to meet like once a week after school and talk about like, okay, well, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? Like, are we seeing improvement within certain students within the class as a whole? If not, like, what can I do to see improvement, and what can I do to engage them, and if I am, like, if I am seeing improvement, keep using those teaching methods. And then the last way is always look for new and engaging activities that I can use in my lessons. My One of my clinical teachers who teaches math and science, every activity she teaches is hands-on in some way. And this really gets the students involved and has them take control of their own learning. And that's something that I want to do too. So I have to continue to look for those new lessons and new ideas and stuff like that. The third question was, over the past semester in Education 4400, how have I used evidence from scholarly journals to advice from my clinical teacher to student performance data to inform my perspective on an approach to teaching? There were so many ways I used evidence to both change and inform my perspective on an approach to teaching. The first one was during Project 3, I researched motivation and whether extrinsic or intrinsic motivation was more effective. And really, I had so many sources on what both types of motivation were, whether they were more effective, or if they even existed. Something I found, and I wrote about it in both the paragraphs and my paper, is that many theorists believe that extrinsic motivation does not exist. That's just extrinsic rewards, and it's really bribing students, and it doesn't do anything for them. And then I found that intrinsic motivation is that inward, like, personal motivation that is an inward drive that motivates students. And that's what we need to be fostering in our classrooms, because students are going to respond best to that because it becomes personal and something that they count on for themselves. And it, like, no one can take that away because no one gave it to them. A second way was advice from my clinical teacher. For every lesson that I taught, they filled out a rubric and gave feedback for me. And after the lesson that afternoon, we would sit down and go through the feedback, and they would explain why I got the score that I did and how I could improve that score. And improving that score was normally including another teaching method, or like doing this instead, or reminding me that I had a tough class to teach this semester and they really need a strong, like, behavior management presence within the classroom. And then lastly, I used student data to approach my teaching. I had to review student data after every lesson plan. I had to take the, like, independent practice and the closure, which was mostly an exit ticket for me, and review it and see if the students met the objective, if they understood the content that I was teaching, if I was effective in my lessons. So I had to reflect on my student data, and this really helped me to see the misconceptions that the students were having. And I was then able to take that and go back to my clinical teacher and say, okay, here's what the students missed in my lesson. It might have been because I didn't teach this as well, or my method wasn't effective, or maybe they just weren't listening. And then again, we were able to sit down and talk through it, and then they were able to plan their next lesson accordingly. So I was really able to use, like, all three of those to help inform my perspective on teaching. And then through that, I changed my approach to teaching from lesson 1 that I taught to lesson 2 because of the student data. I was really like, okay, this method didn't work, let's try a new one. The last question was, over the past semester in Education 4400, what have I learned that will help me adapt my teaching practice to the needs of different learners with different needs? And I did this in both my education and my SPED class. I had to learn how to better adapt my teaching to the different needs of learners, because I'm going to have learners of all different learning styles. I'm going to have learners with disabilities in the classroom. Like, I'm going to have AIG, I'm going to have Tier 3, I'm going to have on par students, and I need to know how to teach all of them effectively. So this class really helped me. For example, during Project 2, I created formative and summative assessments, and these assessments differed in styles so I could fit the learning styles. One was an exit ticket, kind of, and this was a writing prompt, and this is for students who write better, who are read-write learners, and this appeals to them. And then this is for visual learners. They can see how each region is connected and how they differ. And here's another writing one that's very simple. Here's a matching one, again, for really visual learners who just sometimes can't just read something and understand. They need to see it on their own. This is a Kahoot quiz. I love Kahoot. It's super visual, super fun. And the one down here, this one I really tried to make for auditory and visual learners. The students created a script. They had to write it and then record it, and then they had to listen to other students in the classrooms. And this way they're creating the project on their own. So this ties into kinesthetic learning styles. And then they watched others and heard it. And so instead of me teaching all of this content, they're learning it themselves and learning from each other. And then as well in my SPED class, I had to create a universal design for learning lesson, which I created mine for a dyslexic student in my class, and then a visual impairment student. And this lesson just really helped me see like how much differentiation these students need to be successful. And that doesn't mean that they're any less or not as smart as the other students. It just means they learn in a completely different way, and I have to be able to meet those needs and show that I can meet those needs. I really want to focus on the visual impairment student because the universal design for learning allowed me to include assistive technology in the classroom. My visual impairment student uses a VisioPad, which is just a little notebook almost that magnifies what's in front of her. So she can take just a regular piece of paper and put it under this magnification thing and read it easier. And she can point the camera up at the board and read the smart board and the whiteboard like any other student. And she doesn't have to work as hard because it's magnified to a font size that she can read. So that was all the questions for the standard 9, like all the components of it. I really feel like I met every part of it, and I learned so much in this class from the projects because it was really just designed that I chose that I wanted to learn about, and I dove into that, and that was really cool.